Hi, it's me. I'm back from my break from YouTube. Not an intentional break. It just kind of happened, but it was very much needed and I am so ready to be back. I do want to say I had mentioned an Emily Henry video that's coming out of me reading all of the Emily Henry books. It's still coming. It's still happening. Just editing it. Editing in general has been a lot for me, but I'm working my way through it. It should be the next video after this one, so just to let you know. So today we are going to be talking about my summer TBR and TBR spin. If you're just here for the spin, totally understand. There will be a timestamp for when that is gonna happen, so feel free to jump ahead to that if you're just like so excited to hear about the spin. And then maybe, I don't know, come back to here if you want and hear about how I'm doing with my summer TBR that was ridiculously ambitious in hindsight. I think I forgot how many books like would just pop up while I was going through the season that were not a part of the initial list. Also, if you hear about any of the books today and you're like, oh, I want to get those books, I do have links in the description that lead to Tertulia, which is a site that I absolutely love. It's an online retailer for books. Right now they're doing this summer deal that's buy 2 books, get 1 free. So I feel like now's the perfect time. I took advantage of a very similar sale not that long ago. And if you use the specific links in my description, then you are supporting my channel and also making sure that Tertulia continues to want to work with me, which is honestly ideal. Okay, so let's talk about my summer TBR. So I want to just remind you where it was at when we started the season. So this is from my first summer TBR video and what all the books looked like together. And then I did a little update video the last time I did a TBR spin video showing you where it was at, and it looked a little something like this. Technically there was just 1 extra book added to it. I had talked about it, but I didn't own the book when that happened, and that is Ship of Magic by Robin Hobb. We'll talk more about this later. But because I'm doing the Fits Along that Leanne from Literary Diversions is running, that's a read along going through the realm of the Elderling. That's a universe, a literary universe that Robin Hobb has created that is full of quite a few different series. So Leanne's reading through all of them and a bunch of people are joining in. There's a live show for every book. And since Ship of Magic is happening in late August or early September, it definitely had to be on this list. So I did mention that last time, but I didn't own the book at that time, so it wasn't actually in this lineup. So this is the full lineup. This is where my books have been living for this challenge. However, I did have to add 2 more books to it. One of them is my TBR Spin book from last month, and that prompt was to read a book that you would assign if you were an English teacher. I picked A Little Luck by Claudia Pinheiro. Hello, bookmark. And translated by Frances Riddle because I absolutely loved Elena Knows, which was also by Claudia Pinheiro and translated by Frances Riddle. That was one of my favorite books of all time. I have it here. I read it as an ebook, but then I of course went and purchased the book afterwards because I was so obsessed. But I love this book so much, and this one I would definitely want to talk about as an English teacher. So I figured I might as well go with another book by her. I haven't read it yet, so sorry about that. And in general, that'll be a theme. I'm very behind with TBR Spin specifically, but I do have a plan, so there's that. And A Little Luck is added to the stack. And then the other one is a bit bigger. It's Babylon's Ashes by James S. A. Corey, which is the 6th book in the Expanse series. So I've been reading through the Expanse series with my sci-fi reading group, which is Frasier from A Springboard Thought, Gemma from Gem of Books, and Sandy from Miss Reads a Lot. We have read many a sci-fi books together and are currently working our way through Expanse. I'm very excited to get back to this one. There was actually another Expanse book, if you'll remember, that was on my summer TBR that I read with them, but we decided to read this one in September. I know I'll be done with it by September 21st, just based off of how many chapters we usually read per day. So this is by definition on the summer TBR. Okay, so before I talk through all of the books that I have read, and so we can take some off this is where we're at. So this is as bad as it should get. So I want to go through the order in which I read these books. So the first one I read was Northwoods by Daniel Mason. I read this with Karina from Time for Reading, which is an Instagram account. She's the one that does the big book challenge that I participate in every year. So she's the creator of that. And I absolutely love her Instagram, not just for the books, but also oftentimes her stories will have these beautiful nature pictures. And so it's just 2 of my favorite things in one place. I definitely recommend following her if you don't already. But we ended up reading Northwoods together, which was really great, and it gave me the motivation to actually set a time for it on my TBR. So this book is about this cabin in the woods, but through time. So it starts with a short story, I guess, about this guy that goes and builds the cabin initially, but then you get to see different people, different inhabitants of the building. There's a little bit of like mysticism thrown in, like ghost type stuff, but not heavily, not overly so. But there's a lot of different people that end up living and interacting with this cabin, and you kind of see this passage of time just through the lens of this like physical place. It's not to say that you don't hear about anything that happens with these people outside of the cabin. It's just that that's what like anchors the stories together. So it's kind of like a short story collection. That's what it felt like to me, but just one that had a very strong through line. Overall, I ended up giving this book a 4.25 stars. I think it was really fantastic. I totally see why so many people love this book. And there were definitely certain stories that I felt very passionate about specific people in it. Specifically the ones with the letters back and forth. Oh, those ones I loved. And also, I won't say that like every story is like totally separate. You do get to hear a little bit about past stories in future stories, or like the things come up again. So it's not entirely like separate things. And then the next book that I read was Royal Assassin by Robin Hobb. Again, this is part of the Fits Along. So I have been basically working on catching up since I decided to join it. I've always been like one book behind. So I had a lot of reading for this series to do within summer. So I did read Royal Assassin. If you don't know, this is from the Farseer trilogy. This is the second book in the Farseer trilogy, which is the first trilogy that exists in the realm of the Elderling, or was published, I guess I should say. I don't know if any series will go like before this one timeline wise, but the trilogy follows Fitz, who is this young boy at the very start in Assassin's Apprentice, which is the first book. And he is the son of a king in waiting. Although he never got to meet his father, I think he's about 6 at the start of the series. So he never met his father, and he gets taken away from his mother because she is not like married to the king in waiting. And in fact, at this point, the king in waiting has a wife now. So he's entirely like an illegitimate child. But he gets taken away from his mother, and he's cared for within like the town, the kingdom that he is technically a part of, purely because of who his father is, but he's not really treated like a prince. He does get a lot of training that he obviously wouldn't have otherwise, but in all sense, he's never considered as being like a possible future ruler, even when his father dies, which all happens very early, so not spoilers. I did kind of struggle with it, and with the entire first book in general. I think it was like a 3-star book for me, so it wasn't like bad by any means, but it also wasn't like my favorite thing ever, and I was definitely bored in some parts. But then this book, when I got to this one, I had a great time. We get so much more agency out of Fitz because he's a little bit older than he was in the first book, so he makes a lot more of his own decisions and mistakes and goes out on a limb in certain cases, and it's just nice to be following a character who can like really make their own decisions and be like an active participant in their own lives. But also the town itself is dealing with something. The actual king, like the current king, so Fitz's grandfather, he's been like ill for some time, so like that's a whole thing that has to be dealt with. He has 3 sons, but of course, as I said within the first book very early on, Fitz's dad, who's the oldest brother, passes away. So then we're more focused on the younger 2 sons, and then there's a lot happening there. So there's a lot of like this political intrigue that's happening, but also this magic system, and also like Fitz being in the middle of all of it. I think that this book was so much fun for being like set in a kingdom where all these things are happening, and Fitz is kind of this fly on the wall in a lot of situations and doing what he can in others. I really love this one, and I ended up giving it a 4.5 stars. And then my plan was to read other books between that one and the next book in the trilogy, but I couldn't help it. The second I finished Royal Assassin, that's what it's called. They all have assassin in the title. It's very confusing. But the second I finished Royal Assassin, I was like, actually, I can't read anything else right now. I have to read Assassin's Quest. And so I did, which was good because this was the 2, I think, largest books that were on the summer TBR in general off of it. So Assassin's Quest, where do I even begin? Obviously, I can't talk about it too much because it is further on in a series. It's the last book of the Farseer trilogy. But I can obviously tell you that there is a quest involved, which is one of my favorite things. I think specifically like in a fantasy book, I had the absolute best time reading it. I loved the characters that were introduced. I think another reason why I struggled in the first book in Assassin's Apprentice was because we got so much of Fitz and we didn't really get to see a ton of the other characters that were present in the story, and I never really felt connected with anybody else. And then we got a little bit more in Royal Assassin, but then in this one, we get like some characters that actually like stick around for the book. And it was so great to have them there. And I gained an entirely new appreciation for one character that had been in it from the beginning. Actually, for a couple of characters, I would say, that had been in it from the beginning. So yes, absolutely loved this one. This was a 5-star read for me. My first 5-star fantasy since Kings of the Wild. So like this, it feels good. It just feels good. Okay, and then at this point, things were just going too well. And then I read a book that I did not like so much. And that was In the Weeds by B.K. Borison. Ugh. This book is the second book in a series that is 4 books long, and they each take place during a different season. So the first book is Love Light Farms. It's like a Christmas romance novel, so that's obviously the winter book, and then this is the spring book. So I did technically want to read it in spring. That didn't happen. So both this book and the third book, which is the actual summer book, are on my summer TBR. Well, I mean, I guess this one's off of it now because I finished it. But boy, did I not want to. I did not like this book. It's annoying because in the first book, we do get introduced to both of these characters. This is like a Grumpy Sunshine relationship. The male character works on the farm from the first one, like on Love Light Farms, and the female character is this like social media influencer that also existed in the first book and like visited the town. It's also a second chance romance where they had met previously and then they met again for the second time in Love Light Farms. And then, of course, they meet again in this one. In the first book, in Love Light Farms, I liked both of their characters a bit. I wasn't super excited by the idea of like reading their book. Like premise-wise, it's just not one that I would typically go for in a romantic comedy, but I really liked the setting of the first book. And obviously they're all set in the same place. So I was really excited about that. By the end of this book, I didn't like at least him. She's all right, I guess. Yeah, she's good. I don't trust her taste in men, however. I do think that this is maybe a me problem because I think the whole grumpy thing, it's such a fine line to walk. You know what I mean? Like it can be really cute, you know, to see somebody that's kind of got that gruff exterior soften up for somebody specifically. But I don't like when that's mixed with this like darker side of them that like comes out in certain situations. So without getting into any spoilers, I will talk about one situation that happens that is not relevant to the story as a whole. It's just like one random plot line that happens for a very short amount of time. And it involves, so this is Beckett and this is Emily. So it involves Beckett's sister. She was like kind of seeing this guy and then he said something to her that was not great. I do not support him in that. He should not have said it. But when Beckett finds out, he gets so angry immediately and he's like, I'm gonna kill him. And I'm like, dude, okay. let's take a second. Let's calm down. How about maybe the appropriate reaction is, let me go check on my sister. Like, let me see if she's okay. You know what I mean? But you beating up this guy or like teaching him a lesson is not actually gonna do anything for your sister. Like, and it just seemed like he had like no control in that situation. And then he just goes like strong arms this guy. He doesn't actually, there's no physical violence, but well, I can't remember. There might be a little bit of like, you know, a little posturing is happening. And honestly, it just screams like immaturity to me. It just screams, I can't control myself. And I don't like that. That scares me. I don't want a love interest ever in any book to have a reaction like that. Because if I were Emily, I would be like, ugh, what if I do something that makes him mad one day? You know what I mean? Like, that's just a scary thing. But instead she's like, oh, I'm coming with you. Absolutely wild to me. And just like their characters didn't feel very real. I think specifically with Beckett, like making him this big gruff character. And then he also like owns 4 kittens, which is a lot of work. And they do not show how much work it is to have 1 kitten, let alone 4. The way he just leaves these kittens alone all day with like no care in the world is crazy to me, like with full reign of the house. But also like the climax at the end was really frustrating to me. Like the whole end of it, I was just like, ugh, just end already. And then it kept getting more annoying because of the end situation. Overall, 1-star book. Okay, what was the next book that I read? Ooh. Now we get like a fun one to talk about. I feel like I'm like ping-ponging between like loving, hating. Burnham Wood by Eleanor Catton. This book was so good. So this book is set in New Zealand, and it's kind of about this like gardening coalition, this like guerrilla gardening coalition. They'll find these plots of land and they'll just like garden there without asking anybody permission. I mean, they do like really do a good job of thinking about what type of place to go for and everything. And then this big mudslide happens that separates this area of New Zealand from the rest of it, I guess. Or at least it makes it very difficult to get to. And a very wealthy couple own this like huge plot of land that they're planning on making the subdivision in. And they can no longer do construction there. So it's kind of like hauled off. And the coalition sees this as a great opportunity to go there and garden because they think they can get like a full season of gardening in, which means a full season of like a lot of crops because it's a lot more land than they've ever been able to use before. But the couple is also working with this billionaire who's got like his whole own agenda. That's like, there's a lot going on there. But I think a large part of it is about like different groups of people that have very different schools of thought, but maybe they have a similar goal, or no, they have different goals, but like maybe the means could line up. But then it's like, if I'm supporting somebody who's doing this thing that I don't agree with, like that's their goal, but I'm kind of helping them, but it's also helping me get to my goal, like that, all that gray space there. So that's like a big theme in it. There were some great quotes. Oh, I love the descriptions in this were so good. Miserably, she put her hand to her throat to quell the pounding and stared at the device until the screen went dark and the image was replaced by a hash of oily streaks and fingerprints marking all the places she had scrolled and tapped and liked and pinned and maximized and minimized and forwarded and binned and sent. I love that as a description for like I can feel that. That is something that I can feel. This is another quote I really liked. A defeated, airless, ugly feeling rose in her whenever she heard a person of her parents' generation talking brightly about home ownership or foreign holidays or financial serendipity or education for its own sake or second chances in a crowded field. She felt this way sometimes simply if someone spoke about the future, even the very near future, in optimistic terms. But she was not unaware that there was a certain satisfaction to be found in hopelessness, a certain piety, a touch of martyrdom, in feeling oneself and one's entire generation to have been wronged by those in power, and deceived, and discouraged from civic participation, and robbed, and made fun of, and maligned. Like, to present the duality of that, I just feel like that's so good that's such a good way to describe it and explain it. Oh, and you probably could tell already, but this was another 5-star book. Okay, I read more than I realized, and I really have to talk about these books faster, otherwise this video is going to be so long. The next book I read, or actually finished reading because I started this forever ago, was Monsters, A Fan's Dilemma by Claire Dederer. I looked this up. I've been saying Dederer, that's not how you pronounce it. This was also a really great read. So this is a nonfiction book that is kind of about like fandom, but more specifically what you do when there's somebody that you are a fan of, or you're a fan of their works, but like the person themselves is not a good person, or does things that you very much don't agree with, or does things that are illegal even. Like, how do you grapple with that internally as somebody who likes the things they've created? It touches on a lot of different artists, but specifically the ones that are mentioned on the back are Hemingway, Polanski, Woody Allen, Miles Davis, and Picasso. I loved the first half of this quite a bit. You can kind of see that like tab-wise, I really went after the first half of the book, and then the tabs totally like died out by the second half. So I really liked what was being brought up in the beginning, but the second half kind of went in this direction that I didn't like too much. I understand why it did. So basically it started focusing on how people could feel themselves as being monsters, but it specifically focused on motherhood, oddly enough, which seems weird, but actually I do find the premise vaguely interesting. That sounds bad. I think it would be very interesting to certain people. It was only vaguely interesting to me, which is this like idea of motherhood and feeling like you have to like fully give yourself over to like being a mother, and like you have to disregard these other things, these like selfish wants in your life. Like, does that make you a monster? And so it specifically talks about artists, and I think it's two authors that it talks the most about, that ended up leaving their children, or at the very least, spending a lot of their time doing their work, so writing, and not spending time with their children, to the point where, you know, they might leave for quite a while to just focus on writing. And like, is that a monstrous behavior? And I think that in some cases, some could argue that it is, depending on how long you're leaving and if you ever see them again and those types of things. But I think that in a lot of cases it's not. And also the criticism probably wouldn't be the same towards a man that does the same thing. And so it touches on like a lot of those types of things, which I understand, because I think that that's something that the author herself kind of thinks about a lot, being a mother and being a writer. But for me personally, it's just not something that I was interested in reading about, and considering nothing about the book indicated that that would be such a large portion of it, that was kind of just like disappointing for me personally. That being said, the first half I really liked, and I would still overall as a whole recommend this book. I did highlight like a ton of things. So this is from chapter 5, which is titled The Genius, and specifically talks about Pablo Picasso and Ernest Hemingway. Genius is the name we give our love when we don't want to argue about it, when we want our opinion to become fact, when we want to push our obsession onto the next guy, when we don't want to hold our heroes accountable. I felt like that was a good way to say it, because I think that a lot of times when these arguments happen, or not even arguments, but just like discussions about things like these, specifically when we're talking about people that have long since passed away. But a lot of times when you're having these discussions, some people would be like, well, yeah, but they were like a genius. Like, did you see like this thing they did? Did you see this book they wrote? Did you see this painting they made? They were a genius. Therefore, it's okay. I don't want to argue about this anymore. They're a genius, so it's okay that like these things happened. And then it also talks a lot about like this like haunting quality, and almost making these artists seem disturbed, because, and like only by them being disturbed could they possibly create what they create. So of course it's going to come with this other baggage, these other things that they like that they shouldn't like. And I think that that's not great to just like give people license to do things that are awful and have like real consequences and victims. And then this quote I will also mention. So this is specifically about cancel culture as a whole, about how it is presently and like the discussion around it. This trade-off is depressing and maybe even inhuman, but to my mind, it's the bargain that's on the table right now. Some people endure shaming, deserved or undeserved, so that some other people can say what happened to them. Instead of accepting that bargain, we make up an insulting and increasingly dumb name, cancel culture, that invalidates half the equation, the half where people are able to say something is wrong. Perhaps this is the wrong bargain, probably it is, but it's the reality we live in. The liberal fantasy of effortless enlightenment simply assumes we're getting better all the time. But how on earth can we improve unless we listen to people saying what's wrong? Seriously, I got goosebumps while I was reading it right then. Anyways. Oh, what star rating did I give that? 1 second. I gave that one a 3.75. I think it would have been a lot higher if it stuck with what it was like in the beginning for the whole way, but that's a me thing. I do think that a lot of other people would like just like the whole book all the way through. Next one was Bright Young Women. This is like loosely based off of the Ted Bundy murders, which I didn't know, but it wasn't until I was reading the book and then there were certain parts in it that I very much knew about Ted Bundy's story, where I was like, huh, that's interesting. And at first I thought it was just like possibly referencing a bunch of different of those types of things, but by like halfway through I was like, no, this is the situation. And it's definitely based off of it. The author did talk to one of the like survivors, but it never says his name in the whole book. It calls him the defendant the whole time instead of calling him by name. But we get two different perspectives. One is from Pamela, who's in the sorority at FSU, which gets attacked. And it starts like the beginning of the story for her starts like when the attack happens. And then there's like the aftermath of that. And then the other perspective is a woman that was killed by him previously. And you do know that she does end up dying because this is like a past timeline that's happening. That you're getting like flashes to while you're hearing about Pamela's story. But I think that this book does such a good job of representing the women in this story and like the really frustrating parts about not being believed, to kind of go off of what we were talking about in the last book, and to have everything about what you did being questioned. And Pamela, the main character, her like best friends is one of the people that dies, and the things that other people would like say about her or imply about her, or the things that they want to reach to almost find comfort in themselves that this thing could never have happened to them because they wouldn't do the things that she was doing. Like, it's just so frustrating to read about, and you can feel Pamela's frustrations as well. And I think that it captured that so perfectly. But even though it was set in the past, like there are still so many parts of this and so many things that people say that I just like viscerally felt and had been in similar situations or heard similar things said to me or about women around me. And even like the men that are like close to them being like, oh, if I was there, I would have beaten him up or whatever. And like, that's so invalidating and so like not what you need to hear. Like, oh, if you were there, like everything would have magically been different and we all would have been alive. Like, is that what you're saying? You know? And they're saying it thinking that it's like this good, like manly protective thing. And really it's just like, hey, this terrible thing happened. We can't change any of that. And you saying these things is not making me like you anymore, and it's certainly not making me feel safer. Like, which as maybe your goal, I don't know. But yeah, it did such a good job of all these things. I do think the ending, I was hoping for something just like slightly different, or I think that it's something just to tie it together a little bit better. But besides that, it was a really, really good book. And I ended up giving it a 4.25 stars. Oh boy, you know, we just talked about a good one, so now we have to talk about a bad one. And this is really disappointing. Okay. So then I read Saint X by Alexis Shakin. And if you've been around on my channel for a while, specifically last year, you may know that last year, my favorite book of the year was Elsewhere by Alexis Shakin. She's only had 2 books published at this point. So I was very excited to read the one other book she had published, and unfortunately it was a 1.75 stars for me. There was definitely a portion, I think I was maybe 40% of the way through, and I was like, I don't know if I want to keep reading this book. I think I need to DNF it, but I just kept going. I ended up doing the audiobook for a good portion of it just because like I could not get myself to just sit there and read it. I think that I was expecting something different. I was expecting these greater conversations based off of what the back of the book says that just didn't really happen. I should tell you what it's about. So this is about a family goes on vacation, and Claire is the youngest sister, and then she has an older sister, Allison, and Allison ends up dying on this vacation. And this isn't ever solved. It's assumed that she was murdered, but the actual murder was never solved. And there were people brought in for questioning, but then they were let go because the timeline didn't match up. And Claire at the time was 4 or 5 years old. But when she's older and she's got a full job and everything, she ends up seeing one of the men that was questioned originally and then let go. She ends up seeing one of them in New York. And then this strikes up her being much more interested in the case again and wanting to figure it out. But it kind of implies on the back that she is really trying to figure this thing out. This is not that. This is somebody who is scared to ask the right questions, scared to really even look like she is looking, or trying to figure out what's going on, wants to appear to be totally fine, but also is devoting all of her time to obsessing over it without really ever making any progress. And that results in a very frustrating read. I do think it has some interesting points about race that it brings up. Specifically, this is the vacation they went on was to a Caribbean island, and they are a very wealthy white family that went there. So there is some going on there, and not just race, but also just privilege in general, wealth disparity, and a place that's so dependent on tourism. There is a lot of that, and class situations. So I think that some of those were good, but it didn't do enough of that. And it also didn't do enough of the trying to figure out what happened to really bring it together and make it all that interesting of a read. And so while it had its moments, they were very few and far between. And I think that's why I struggled the most with it. So yeah, honestly, not great. I gave it a 1.75 stars. I don't want to think about it anymore because it makes me sad to think about. Okay, and then next actually was not a book from my summer TBR, but I figure I would talk about it because I don't know when else I will. But it's The Starling House by Alex E. Harrow. So I read one other book by this author, which was The Once and Future Witches. Every time I say that title, it sounds wrong. So I had read that book and I generally enjoyed that book. I think it was like a 3-star-ish. But The Starling House, I took, I think like 2 or 3 months to read. It's been like just kind of happening in the background for a long time. When I would finish a book, I would kind of like pick it up and read a little bit more of it and be like, maybe now's the time I'll finish it. And then be like, no. It's set in this like small town where like a lot of these bad things happen. And then there's the Starling House, which is this like kind of creepy, dark academia feeling, very large house that has like this big iron gate in the front and everything. And so there's like a lot of lore in the town that's like around that house. There's a guy living in it. And then there's our main character whose name I cannot remember, and her brother whose name I can remember. That was Jasper. But she's our protagonist. Well, I guess really we get her perspective, and then we also get, I don't know the name of the guy that was in Starling House either. I should look this up. Richard, maybe? Gothic fantasy. That is the description or the genre. Opal. How could I forget that? Her name was Opal and his name was Arthur, not Richard. Okay, so we've got Opal, her brother Jasper. They like live alone in a motel. So they have like next to no money, and Opal just like wants to care for Jasper and like wants him to have a good life and is like totally disregarded like anything for her own life, her own self. And then Arthur is like living in the Starling House. That's what he's up to. And I think the frustrating thing about this book was that Opal just like decides what Jasper wants out of life and then is like trying to give that to him as a surprise, even though it's something that you would have to work for a very, very long time for. And the whole time I'm just thinking like, maybe you should ask him first. It's just crazy to me to do all this work, to focus so much on it to the point where like she's ignoring him sometimes, or she's not around as much for him, or she's lying to him and keeping secrets from him in order to like obtain this goal that she doesn't even really technically know that he wants. Also, there's something like very weird about the house, and like you don't really get to know until a good ways into the book. Also, I think the foreshadowing in this book was really just spoiling the book. Like it was like trying to foreshadow things, but it was really just being like giving you too much information so you knew exactly what was happening. It's like, oh, there's definitely nothing behind this curtain, and if there was, it would definitely not be a gun. And then like 200 pages later, it's like, it's a gun. And you're like, yeah, I figured that out on my own. Like I put those pieces together, but thank you. That's what reading this book was like. Didn't feel super connected to the characters. There were like certain things that happened that I was like, oh yay. But other than that, unfortunate, but what can we say? Probably won't read from the author again. Because now I've had kind of like a okay book and like a ugh book. So the last book that I fully read and completed from my summer TBR is The Snap by Elizabeth Staple. It's an arc from Doubleday Publishing, and I was just so excited to read it. It sounded like a lot of fun. So this follows Poppy Benjamin, who works in like the football industry. She works for a football team in like media relations or something. And we get like a dual timeline. One is present day where the head coach of the team has just passed away. And then the other perspective is 15 years ago when she was just starting as an intern. And the coach was murdered. So there's like a little bit of a mystery going on there. I mean, yeah, I guess it's a mystery. It's just, it doesn't feel like the main goal of the book. Like it definitely feels like its goal is something else, and also there is this mystery alongside of it. Poppy is also in WAGS, which is Women Against Groping Shitheads, which actually I think there is another way that acronym is typically used, but I can't remember what it's supposed to be. But she's in this group with like 3 other people, and the day after the murder happens, she gets this letter that says like, I know what you did, you have like 5 days or something. And I think that a lot of this book comes down to accountability. It comes down to being a woman in a male-dominated field, sticking up for each other and believing women, which I'm now seeing is a very strong theme throughout these books. And also like believing women even as a woman. I was very surprised at the direction. Oh my God. I just like inhaled my spit, like mid-sentence. How does one do that? I was very surprised by the direction that this book went, but I very much liked that. It was not what I was expecting. I thought it was going to be much more like thriller-esque, but it was really having like this much larger conversation that I really enjoyed. Enjoyed might not be the right word for it, but in a conversation that I think is important, and I like the way that it was had. And like also that there was no like clear-cut answers. There was no like good guys and bad guys, you know what I mean? I did end up giving this one a 3.25 stars. I think that it was slow in places. Overall, like really liked it, and I would recommend it to people to read. Okay, so this is technically where my summer TBR is right now, which doesn't look great. We don't have much time left. However, I am in the middle of 2 of these books. So at the end of all that, these are the books that I have left on my summer TBR, along with these, which I am in the middle of. And actually, technically, I'm also in the middle of The Little Friend, but I've been in the middle of it for like a month. So TBR Spin, if you don't know, is a year-long like reading challenge that Jill from the Book Bully and I do, where every month we spin a wheel, it leads us to a prompt, and then that prompt leads us to a book that's on our TBR Spin stack. That stack is made up of 12 books initially that you pick at the beginning of the year, and every month, obviously, the stack gets 1 book shorter until you have no more books left. So since we only have 4 months left of the year, I only have 4 books left, which is The Picture of Dorian Gray, Misery, In the Dream House, and Wednesday's Child. And now we get to spin the wheel. Oh no. I had to change out my battery pack, and then I thought I pressed the record button, but I hadn't. And I spun already, and I have the recording of me spinning, and I want to keep it because like it's a fun one. We're swapping out a book, and I feel like we haven't done that in a while. So I'm gonna keep it even though I don't have like video recording of me reacting to it, and I'm so sorry about that. So we are swapping out the longest book on our stack for another book from your larger TBR, and then we're spinning again. I'm assuming that's gonna be Misery for me. So yeah, definitely swapping out Stephen King's Misery for something else, which I'm slightly disappointed about. I've been filming this for way too long. Like literally the sun's almost down. I should turn the lights on actually. Okay, a little better. I was planning on filming this whole thing in daylight, and it took me ages. I think I know which book I want to add. I kind of want to add Wolf Song just because I just got this, and I was at the airport when I got it, and I only read like 20 pages because I was like, realistically, I should be reading the other books I'm supposed to be reading, and like I had them on my Kobo, like on my e-reader while I was at the airport, but I still was like, let me just get a feel for the book, and I was sucked in like so immediately. So I think that I want to add this one. Yeah, okay, I'm adding this one. So removing Misery, adding Wolf Song by TJ Klune. Okay, we've got our stack again. Now we're spinning again. Okay, well, this makes this easy. Oh, I wish I had remembered what my page count was for these books. I think that it was Wednesday's Child that was the shortest, but give me a second. Oh wait, maybe it's Picture of Dorian Gray? Should I count the appendices? Because that is gonna matter now. Oh no, I shouldn't, because these are reviews on the books. Okay, so this is 213, so I actually think that this is the shortest, but let me just check in the Dream House just in case. I know this is also in the 200s. No. Okay, so Picture of Dorian Gray by Oscar Wilde is going to be my pick for September, which I'm actually very excited about. I feel like this is a good time to read it. Okay, so I don't think I have to actually, I'm not gonna add this one to this like list of books here. I'm gonna probably add it to my fall TBR instead, because technically there is a week in September that is fall, and I already have too much going on here. I am kind of tentatively thinking about, once I finish the books I'm currently in the middle of, filming a video that's like me attempting to get my life together and finish my summer TBR, where I try to read an impossible number of books in not very many days. I think it'll be fun. I think I'll have to read nearly a book a day to actually do it, but I think it'd be fun just in general to try to read as many of them as I can, and to specifically prioritize the TBR Spin books, since I am so behind on that. So if that is a video that you do think that you'd like to see, let me know. Like I said, the Emily Henry video is coming, I promise, and my autumn TBR should be coming soon too. So if you're interested in any of those possibilities, please do consider subscribing. Thank you so much for watching, coming along on this. Sorry it's been a minute, but I've got a lot of things that I'm really excited about. And I feel like now that summer is ending and I'm in somewhere with winter, I feel like I'll want to be inside more, which means more reading. And I'm really excited about that. So thank you again for watching, and I hope to see you in the next one. Bye!